Hi, I'm Kim Hallin, and I'm the author of Horse Wisdom Life Lessons for Humanity. And I'm the host of this book club. And tonight we are going to be talking about lesson 10, which is boundaries are designed to be flexible. A topic that everybody can never get enough of is boundaries. And I've got two ladies with me here tonight, right now, and there may be some more coming, but let's go ahead and let you two say hi so everyone will know who's here. Kate, why don't you go first?
Sure. I'm Kate. I'm from North Carolina, and I work primarily with rescue and sanctuary and now retired horses.
Awesome. And you said where you are? You said North Carolina, right?
Yes.
Okay. I was like almost listening at the beginning.
I
Sorry.
may have been mumbling.
No. I was like looking at something on my controls. So, okay, great. Thank you, Kate. And Mary.
I'm Mary. I'm from Hartsville, South Carolina, and I am a retired school teacher and done a lot of other things. So right now I'm involved in working with our local Humane Society and fundraising for that.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Mary.
Mhm.
And so I know that I've known both of you ladies for a while. We've done a lot of work, and I know boundaries are something that you two have struggled with in your life as much as I've struggled with it in my life. And Mary and I were talking just a little before we started recording here, and just how, like, I think it's something that we deal with and continue to learn about and get better with through our whole lives, right? This isn't boundaries aren't something that you figure out once and and it's all like everything is better. And particularly because in the human world, and this is something I think I really want to like reflect on a lot tonight, is how we don't learn about boundaries, right? I mean, I don't even know in all the years that I did therapy that boundaries were ever really covered as a topic, even brought up, even in therapy, let alone like in families or in school or anywhere else. It's just not something, for whatever reason, that human society focuses very much on, but yet nobody can really function well or even survive really mentally and emotionally without having some ability to navigate and work with boundaries. And what I think has happened a lot in the human world is we've started to rely on things like rules and laws and policies and procedures and customs and etiquette, those sorts of things that are really set a lot of times, not really very flexible. We've kind of relied, we sort of rely on those, right, to keep really egregious things from happening, so that certain ways of behaving are illegal or are against policy or protocol. Here, I'm going to let Jen in. She's coming in. So, and those are rules and policies, laws. Those things are very they're set, and then they're the same for everybody, right? Like everybody has to abide by the same ones. One of the things that I thought was really fascinating, especially in talking about how it is in nature and how it is in horse herds, is that boundaries above everything else are flexible, right? They're not, I don't have the same boundaries with everybody in my life, and I don't have to communicate them or enforce them or negotiate them the same in every relationship. They're different. And that's something that nuance, that dance to it, that's kind of an art really, that you get good at by practicing, is one of the things that we don't really talk about or focus on in human society. And we kind of have rules instead, and we rely on those, and they're the same for everybody. And it's interesting too, that can get into the whole thing about equality, and everybody should be treated equally. And I'd love later on for us to chat a little bit about, is that how it works in nature? Is equality what works there? Or is that something, anyway, it's all really fascinating, right? And there's no right or wrong answers. It's just really interesting to talk about it. So I want to go ahead and give Jen a chance to introduce herself real quick, because we did Mary and Kate, but Jen joined us. So Jen, why don't you introduce yourself real quick?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Johnson.
Yay, where are you?
I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, a suburb.
All right, awesome. So, all right, after that introduction, I'd love to just hear, let's start like we always do and just kick off, if you remember, like it may have been a while since you read the chapter, but if there's anything in your mind that stood out when you read the book, that maybe either resonated or you were like, hadn't really thought about it that way. Was there anything from the book that really stuck out for you?
I love the part about when you talked about Shoki and Marcus and how Marcus was sort of oblivious to boundaries and Shoki gave him boundaries, and then nobody was mad. They just went about their business. There was no emotional, I'll get you back for that, yak, 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 and pouting and all that. I mean, I just think this is the way it is, and I'm not mad, but this is it. And everybody was fine. I just, the emotional garbage that happens most of the time when you say what your boundaries are the worst part.
Yeah, definitely different in the human world. And, one thing horses don't always have is a lot of, I guess, etiquette or politeness about it. Like if they feel like they need to talk about a boundary, they're going to talk about a boundary, whether it's a kick or a bite or pin my ears or whatever. So what they don't have is this whole idea that we should be polite, right? So that's another layer that as humans, if we're in society, we kind of do have to think about, how do I set a boundary effectively without being totally rude, right? But then again, sometimes things are thought of as rude that really aren't. So there's that intention of that, again, horses don't really have to worry that much about. They don't take that personally. But I do think that idea about apologizing or not apologizing, like after we've set a boundary, in the human world, probably the way to think, one is like never apologize for setting a boundary. Like that's what we should be clear about. We never should apologize for that. If we end up having to apologize about how we did it, that's something we can think about later in the situation. Sometimes we only get to a place where we are capable of setting a boundary when we're really angry or upset. And then maybe we don't, we kind of say it in ways that weren't very helpful or very nice. And we might decide we want to apologize about how we did it later. But I think we should be clear that we're not apologizing for having a boundary. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really love this chapter, because it's about Marcus and I adore Marcus, but, I love the part about how Tempo, stepped in and tried to make a more skilled education for Marcus, instead of actually kicking him, kind of pantomiming kicking him and guiding him into how to get out of a corner, since he hadn't learned how to do that. I talk, I think, at every single book club here about my brain injury, and it's, I grew up not being allowed to have any boundaries. I grew up with a very narcissistic parent who really obliterated my boundaries, and it took decades for me to learn how to even begin to negotiate that. And I didn't have a lot of skill around it. And then the brain injury happened, and it has actually been a godsend for me around boundaries, because I just can't tolerate the kind of things that I tolerated before, things I should not have tolerated before. But the shadow side of that is that my patience level is like, much lower than it used to be. So my skill in conveying my boundaries has not always been great. So I mean, this has been like a huge thing that I've been negotiating for the last year and a half. And like, it really has evened out a lot. And I'm proud of myself. I'm super proud of myself in how I have been negotiating boundaries with the horses that I work with, and the people that I deal with. And, I've been making more, like, I had made sort of hard and fast rules for myself that, I'm just not even going to entertain X type of personal situation in my life because I can't negotiate it right now. And I have been getting more flexible about that. And it's hard, but like, I'm working really hard at it, and I'm doing better at it than I ever have in my life. So I don't know. This is such a rich, it's just such a rich topic, and just something that I think a lot of us as women, especially women in the South, oh my God, negotiate our whole lives, because the politeness thing is just a murderer, man. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And it's taught and conditioned from a very, very young age, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we don't really know how to be any other way. And so it feels often really selfish, really rude, really, we have to sort all of that out, right?
Yeah. And
Well,
people
the
take it very
boundary thing, I
Yeah.
was going to say the boundary thing isn't good in the South either. Like the blowing boundaries is a thing. Like everybody expects for you to tell them everything, or, and
Oh yeah.
just be, I find, having grown up in Georgia and then moving back and living here, I do think that people have different, I think in the North, can't say for sure, but I think people mind their own business a little bit more and just, but and kind of people expect you to be warming and inviting and come in and whatever. So I don't know, but I agree with Kate. Definitely women are expected to not have boundaries, but I don't think men are the same way. I don't know if anybody, I'm not trying to be anti-men or non anti-women, whatever, but I do think that women are expected to have less boundaries, whereas you wouldn't dream of a man, I think, at least in some professional situations or whatever, that I can think of being forced, having that forced on them and having to ask for their boundaries. But I think it happens more with women. I don't know if maybe people disagree with me, and I'm okay with that, but just, it seems like women, it's harder for women to have boundaries because I don't think people expect them to have firm boundaries. Like you just wouldn't even expect a man to let down their boundaries. I don't know.
Or you get labeled as a certain way if you are a woman that does have boundaries.
Oh, believe me. Yeah. Bitch, there I am. Sorry
Right.
if that offends anybody, but yeah. If you're I have my boundaries and I'm not gonna, then as a female, you're a negative word. As a man, that's just them. I mean, they wouldn't expect anything less, I guess, but I don't know if I'm making sense, but.
Yeah, you're making sense. And there's a whole lot in there. And I wish that I had men coming into this book club discussion, because I think on many of the topics, I would love to hear, those, and not all men are alike, right? So there's across the board there too. But I do, obviously it's a different experience. And I grew up in Florida, which is kind of the South, but the part of the South Florida I was in was like mostly Northern people who moved South. And so when I came to college in North Carolina and then living in South Carolina, that's particularly working in South Carolina as a woman was really interesting. I would have people just ask me the most personal things about, when are you going to have a child? What's like things like, I wasn't going to, and then what's wrong with you? Like, you can't have children. Like, I mean, they would just be like, within 5 minutes, you're having this really personal conversation with people. That's like, what's happening? And at that time, I really didn't, know how to have the boundaries. But as you said, there's just, you're pretty much, talk about anything in the South a lot of times that seems like really, there's no
and then I was your roommate and just blew it all to pieces. I walked in the first day, I'm like, hey, let's not go to mine.
Well, that's kind of different, roommates, like you want to get to
I know, but
right?
I probably shocked you quite a bit. And then, I'm not that kind of person anymore. But at the time I was,
Yeah.
Kim was very different. And I think she was just like, okay, hi. Yeah.
I was always, as always, very much an introvert, and having to learn how to navigate that in all new situations was interesting for me. Yeah. All right. So I wrote down a few things that I thought were some words as I was looking through the chapter again. So some words I wrote down, one was flexible. So boundaries, as Kate was talking about, you're learning you're now feeling confident enough to try navigating some areas where you have to be flexible with the boundaries, right? Where you have to figure out those nuances and kind of trial and error, right? Some situations where you said you didn't think you were ever going to put yourself again. Another word was responsive, that boundaries are responsive, and that goes with flexible. But we can't go into a relationship necessarily knowing in advance. Sometimes we can when we are someone who hasn't had them. We might decide in advance, I'm going to go in and these are going to be some boundaries I'm going to keep, right, for self-protection. But in a healthy dance, really, we don't know what boundaries we're going to need to have until we start interacting with someone. And then we have to be responsive to what's happening and what's coming at us. And that's where horses are just amazing when you watch them. They're just so present. They're present with themselves. Like, how do I feel? And then, oh, you just did that. How did that make me feel? Right. And then there's this whole dance that just goes back and forth the whole time. Yeah. Do many of you, do you have any relationships where you feel like that dance just can happen organically in your lives? Have you had any? Or does it always seem like it's kind of work to figure out, or a struggle to have those conversations?
I didn't have any boundaries, so I just did whatever I could do to please somebody so I wouldn't have a conflict.
So conflict avoidance was, yeah, for a lot of women, I think that's one. And that's not really being responsive, is it? Truly being responsive. It's avoidance. It's avoidance. Yeah. And then we get into a trap of, then we get frustrated when someone doesn't know what our boundary is or doesn't honor it, even though we have done nothing to show them that we even have one, right? So it's this bad cycle. And that got into another one of the words that came up, and that's consequences. And we think of those as like really maybe bad things, but consequences are what tell you really crossed the line, right? Or even maybe a small consequence says you kind of crossed the line. Like, that's the kind of experiential learning that makes the boundary dance, right? If someone says no and that doesn't feel good, no is still a consequence. Right? Or there could be a bigger consequence of someone backing away or saying, I don't want to be in the relationship, or getting angry. Those are all different kinds of consequences. Yeah.
I liked, and you didn't necessarily use this phrase, it's not personal, but you talked about that example of Marcus wanting to come into the shelter and Shoki, first laying down his ears and that didn't come across, and then baring his teeth, and then Marcus was like, okay, you don't want me over there, I'm going to go over here instead, and then it was fine. And like, that's one of the things that I watch and appreciate so much about, and I'm not going to say all the horses I work with, because I have worked with a couple horses who have just been so hot and conflict, just prone to conflict, that they don't always let it go, and they do pout and they do seem to hold a grudge, but that's, it's rare. But generally it's like, I think of it as conflict language. It's like they have a conflict language that they understand, and there are levels, and there are levels of consequence, and like, once it's over, and they're like, all right, we've settled that, that's done. And like, that's the piece of it that I miss with most humans, because people take it so freaking personally most of the time. Even if you make a boundary in a kind way, a lot of people take that very personally. And like, I don't know if it's just like a lot of people haven't done therapy. I'm not sure what that's about, because it's like, how can we possibly negotiate this world and negotiate having relationships with each other without being clear about this? And if you're a jerk about it, it's like, sometimes, yeah, I've been really hot sometimes when I've set a boundary, because it's just you know, part of it is the brain injury and part of it is just maybe my lack of skill. And if that happens, I come back later and I say, I'm really sorry. Like, I didn't negotiate that well and I shouldn't have done this. I will not do it again. You know, I make amends the best I can, but I don't apologize, like you said before, for making the boundary, because that's so essential. And it's like, sometimes it's the only way that I can continue in a relationship at all. So it's like, well, we can have this, or we can not have a relationship at all. So it's really your choice, which is going to be. I don't know, but yeah, like with the conflict language stuff, like I always say with the horses that I work with, if I try to remember every single time I have an interaction with a horse, I'm like, you have to remember I have this stupid baby body and you can't use the same conflict language with me as you use with your friends. Because like, my body can't take it.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm like small. I will listen to your small messages to me. Um, and
Yeah.
that's my responsibility, is to pay attention to those early messages so that they don't get to the point where they feel they have to fight, you know, rear, whatever.
Yeah. And you hit on something else there, and that's that the interplay between intention and consequences. So the better you are at reading the horse's intentions, right, you don't have to have as big a consequences.
Yeah.
But we get that from learning. And that definitely happens in herds too, as horses become more familiar with each other. A lot of times the language gets softer, or one reads the other better, right? Or they just know in advance. They're like, I'm pretty sure, like Rayleigh reads Tempo a lot, because Tempo's not always real polite with her. She's pretty strong with her boundaries. Rayleigh, you can see him. He's like, yeah, if I go there, I'm pretty sure she's gonna pin her ears, so I'll just go around, right? You can see him working it out because he knows, and because she's consistent, right? She's not her boundaries pretty consistent, and how she expresses them are. Yeah.
Well, and specific, you know, like as people, I don't know, you know, like I I ended a situationship that I have been dealing with for the last several weeks this morning. And
I gotta
and
write that down.
but I have been really specific with him about, you know, where my boundaries are. It's like, you know, a few days ago, I was like, X hurt my feelings because X, Y, Z. I'm like, I want you to understand exactly what I'm telling you so that you can decide, like, am I okay with not doing this again? Or am I going to keep doing it and have this go away? You know, and today I was like, look, you know, ABC has happened 3 times. This is not something that I want to deal with in my life. And I'm going to have to call it. So like, I don't know. I think generally horses are pretty specific, like at least from what I've seen, they seem to understand like what the message is. You know, it's like in that situation with Shoki and Marcus, you know, because Marcus didn't have the background of having been in a herd, it's like he didn't understand what the message was that Shoki was trying to get across. That's why Tempo had to step in. But it seems like, I don't know, in most of the situations that I've seen, they get like, okay, this is happening because X. Yeah, and I don't think that we as people always are so skilled at communicating that piece of it either.
No, and also there's a lot of context, right, that goes into all of that. That again comes back, well, a couple things that come to mind when you say that. One is, again, that presence of like, what's the full context? Was I present with every little step that was occurring and everything that was happening here? We're often like in our own thoughts or doing our own thing, and then somebody, you know, blows up or something. We're like, whoa, where did that come from? Whereas if we've been paying attention to body language, we might have had a clue, right, that was coming. The other is that too, human language is a beautiful thing and a horrible thing, or a dangerous thing, because we can say things that aren't true, right, or that are different than what our body language is saying. We sometimes even convince ourselves that they're true. I had an interesting conversation with a client recently that was here. They were here for a family retreat, and they were talking about how wonderful it had been that they have a rule in their family now where you don't ever assume what someone else is feeling, right? You always ask, how are you feeling, right? Or how do they feel about something? They're just practicing. And I thought, that is very nice. And then the mom was like, but this morning, I don't know, because it's a teenage boy, right? And she was like, I asked you something and you said that. She's like, but I don't really believe you, right? And I said, that is where we get into danger, though, in the human world, is that we are capable of saying something that isn't true or that isn't accurate, or for lots of reasons, right? Whatever the reason may be. But then it's dicey. Then if you're only going on what someone says, you may miss it. So she was relying on what he said, but she was also like reading his body language, or maybe using the context, right, of her relationship with him. I don't know why she knew that probably wasn't true, but it made her sort of question like their whole thing of like, we always go on what someone says, how they feel. And it's like, yeah, that's good. It's a good step to always acknowledge that only the person you're talking to can tell you how they feel. But I think in the horse world, it is the other is always telling them how they feel, right? I don't think horses are really capable or would even have any reason to think about being lying, right? Or what's the word I'm trying to say? They're not trying to confuse anyone or manipulate anyone, right?
Right.
So that's purely a human world complication. Yeah.
Well, and with the example, I don't know, it's complicated because it's like a mother, who's an older, more experienced human versus an adolescent boy who's still learning how to communicate. But it's like, if you have a rule, like when you tell me how you feel, I'm going to believe you. And then you say, oh, well, I don't believe you. I don't know. It's like, it is.
Yeah. It's
Boys,
tricky.
sorry, it's about to get dog barky in here. It's the boy's responsibility to be honest about his feelings because they have that role, and it's her responsibility to believe him what he said. I don't know. It's like that. It gets so freaking tricky, man.
But in a way it isn't, though. Like you just said, though, if they let that play out, right, and she took him at face value, then he's going to have to live with the consequence of if that wasn't true, right?
Yeah.
And so him figuring out later that, oh, that actually didn't help me in the long run.
That's right.
But that may take time for him to figure that out,
Right.
or to learn that. But yeah,
But it does seem
In the
like that.
moment.
It's like, otherwise, okay, mom has to continue being the mind reader, which is, I assume, what they were trying to avoid in the first place. And that's where we get stuck all the time. It's like when women are supposed to be freaking mind readers. Yeah.
In the moment, though, did she say she believed him that morning? Like in the moment, did she like, okay, and move on, and it came out later?
I got the feeling that, yeah, it was something in a conversation in the car on their way
She
here.
didn't doubt him at the time.
She didn't out him at the time, but she
Yeah.
kind of did in the conversation then. And she was like, and she asked him, she's like, well, was that really true when you said it? And he was like, probably not, right? So he admitted it when she asked him. So then there's another aspect of it, I guess. If you feel like there's some discrepancy there, you could just say, are you sure? It's like, are you, you could ask them, are you being honest? And if they say yes, as long as they don't take that as a challenge, right? Or being condescending. If it's just honestly, I'm just curious, was that really a truthful answer?
Maybe it's good, though, that she left it till later, because maybe by then he'd kind of moved past whatever mood, but then she still tried to get to the heart of it. But her taking it at face value at the time, which was the deal they had, sounds like she handled it pretty well, I would say.
Yeah. And if they have an agreement that that's how they're going to operate, then I think they do need to stay true to that agreement of how they're operating.
Yeah.
So let's see what else I wrote down here. We already kind of talked about the do not apologize. But yeah, let's go a little more into there's like strict rules and laws we talked about, and then there are the things we talked about earlier about like how women are supposed to behave, especially in the South. It's not necessarily a rule or a law, but it's just custom or etiquette where you are. And what are the benefits of having, rules and laws and protocols in human society? Do they help us with order and fairness, those sorts of things, but also, does it, what does that teach us about boundaries or the need for them? Or does it just allow us to avoid having them, having those negotiations? I don't know. Let me
Right.
ask, oh, go ahead, Mary.
I just was thinking, my experience has been that if I said what I really thought about the situations, I would probably not be included in anything. I feel like, as you said, the South is so unique in that everybody smiles and everything's wonderful. And I have always found that just absolutely exhausting. However, I just usually keep my mouth shut to avoid any kind of conflict. But I also avoid the people. If I can't be myself, to a degree, I try not to be there because it is so exhausting. And nothing is happening except trivial babble. And I don't have enough time left in my life to listen to that shit. Just the way I feel.
Yeah, frankly, that's how we should all feel early on, right? Like none of us have enough time for that. Yeah. Do animals have trivial babble? Any animals?
Dogs do. I don't know.
Dogs
It seems
do?
like it sometimes. I don't know. I mean,
I think they
trivial,
might.
I don't know the answer, right? Like they and then another question, would they if they weren't living in a domestic setting?
Mm.
I think they are the only thing in the world that is honest. And what you see is what you get with an animal. And that to me has been the attraction to my work with them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I guess when you said trivial, Kim, I just, it's like I think about my chickens and I think about my dogs, and they do vocalize just to vocalize. Sometimes, yeah, it's not, I don't think it's ever with the intention to deceive anyone or to conceal anything, because that's just not part of their culture.
They're not gossiping. We don't actually really know what they're talking about, do we?
Well, that is true. The chickens seem like they could, gossip about each other. I don't know. No.
I know.
I have no idea what they talk about. They're talking about something all the time. Yeah.
I have a silky bantam that is she's always like honk, 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 honk. When she sees me, she comes up honk, 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 honk. And it's really cute, but and maybe it's just because she wants a treat or something like that, but she's very vocal around me. And sometimes I think she's just talking, and that's so sweet,
Yeah.
And but yeah, they make a lot of sounds, but I don't know if they're always communicating something important or just vocalizing, or what. I've often wondered that about my chickens, for sure. Yeah. I know my dogs just are hilariously silly and sometimes are just wanting to hear themselves or wanting to get attention or something. For sure, the dogs definitely.
Yeah.
I think you just said a lot of, so I even think about like Bart. He doesn't make a lot of sound, so it's kind of easy to like, sometimes he's definitely communicating something to another being, right? There's definitely that, but he also just makes a lot of sounds. I think they're just like, yum, this is good. I feel good. Like, it's like, is he happy sounds or sad? So sometimes I think it's just what I would call self-expression, and it may be that way with chickens too, or birds. This is just how I feel, right? And then there's language that is communication. So it's not one or the other. Yeah.
There's a pig at the barn where I work, and at the end of the night, like, she goes around and she just gets to wander around the barn and snuffle up all of the or to food that have fallen on the ground. And I just love, it's like, I call her the Empress Roomba, this is totally off topic, sorry, but it's like, yeah, she just glides around snuffling up all the, little crumbs of things and like making those little happy noises. And it's just the cutest freaking thing I've ever seen in my life. Like the happy noises just make me happy.
Oh, totally, right?
Not talking to anybody. She's just like,
Well, what if we could do that as people too? Like, how often do we just kind of express or make noises based on how we feel? I think when I'm by myself,
oh, I do.
I do it more than I do when other people are around, right? But what if we all just did that and they'd be like, oh, okay, she's in a good mood or not, right? Just by not even having to communicate with you, just like hearing what sounds you're making with yourself.
Right. I don't know. I do that. I think it's like one of those things that happens. It's like I'm turning into one of those eccentric old women, who not old, I'm not old, whatever, getting older. But, I think like there's that stereotype as women get older that we just sort of get weirder. And I think it's that we just stop giving a shit as much, which I think is great for us for the most part, because most of us give way too much of a shit about what other people think about us. But oh yeah, I make a little happy sounds when I feel like it.
Why not? If you look at nature, it's like most of nature does, right? Yeah. So I really am fascinated with this idea of fairness and equality. Because when I look at my horse herd and even Bart, so it's not just the horses, but the animals that I live with, they do not treat each other the same. Bart does not treat Tempo the same as he treats Rayleigh, as he treats Puck, and they don't treat each other the same. And it just has me very intrigued. Like, we are so obsessed kind of in human society. And it's because the power control stuff, I think, creates oppression in a way that maybe doesn't exist in the natural world. So maybe it's the antidote to that. But when we treat everybody the same, or we're expected to, it's really hard to have organic boundaries. Very hard to talk about how we feel and be honest about that in the moment, right?
Right.
Yeah. Is it
Yeah.
possible to have, I know when I was a supervisor in the workplace, I mean, I needed to treat everybody the same. There was no, there were protocols, or, if I did something, I had to follow the protocols of how I treat someone differently. That often, oh man, yeah, the protocols were like not often a good fit for what really needed, the conversations that really needed to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, because we live in this very artificial culture where we're doing very artificial things almost all the time that are designed to, it's like, we're supposed to be either buying and consuming things or working and producing things all the time, basically, which is not normal. It's not normal. So yeah, we have to come up with all these artificial rules about how to treat each other because we're not living in an organic environment. But I mean, it doesn't honor who we are as individuals, and it doesn't honor cultural differences, and it doesn't honor anything about us. Like one thing that we haven't talked about yet is, I mean, people are on a really wide continuum from like closed to wide open. And, as an empath and as somebody who, grew up without boundaries, it's like you are like a freaking beacon for a lot of people who want stuff from you. It's like whether they are consciously aware of it or not, they detect that you have something to offer them and they want to take it. And like that is something that I've also been working on a lot, is like how to appropriately protect myself in just everyday life as an empath and somebody who I think constitutionally is more open. Like aside from my upbringing, I think that is my nature as well to some extent. So like I do expect people to treat me differently because I'm different. And like it's my responsibility to manage and mitigate that in a way that protects myself, and to choose and kind of discern like when I want to engage with someone, how I want to engage with someone, and when I just want to say like, "Shh," you know, the freaking armor's coming down and I'm not, like, you need to get away from me right now. So that's just like one little tiny aspect, and then there's just, I mean, there's a million things about what make us different. And it's like the ways that we can interact with each other are just infinite, and we try to boil them down to these stupid grade school rules. It's like impossible. It's impossible.
Yeah, we can't really fit into those roles at all. Yeah, and I'm really intrigued, Kate, especially with you saying, going out into some new environments, trying new things. So a lot of times when we've been empaths, or we've been like conditioned to be nice or always to smile, like I can't count how many times I've been like walking around somewhere and like people I don't even know will like look up at me and they'll be like, smile. Why do you look so serious? Smile.
Mm,
And they're like, oh, you have a beautiful. And I'm like, who are you to tell me to smile? Like, you don't even know what's going on. Like, why was I bothering you? Like, I mean,
right,
it's just like
right.
this strange thing, right? What do you, Jen?
It's called RBF, and I have had it apparently all of my adult life. And I have had perfect strangers say, smile, it's not that bad. And I was in a perfectly good mood. I was thinking, and just when I think, I furrow my brow, not because I'm upset, but I have had total strangers on numerous occasions tell me to smile, tell me to lighten up. And I'm like, well, I ain't going to lighten up now because you just made me mad. But don't tell me how to be. But that, I don't know, that was a trend for a while, the RBF thing. But
What does
I
RBF? What
really
does
have it
RBF stand for?
apparently.
What does RBF stand for?
Resting bitch face.
Oh, well, maybe I have
I
it too.
totally have it. And
I
some
must
of
have it too.
my daughter's friends who I've never even really had conversations with are like, we're scared of your mother. Like, why? And she was like, why? I mean, she's like, well, I mean, I have a healthy respect for her, but why be scared of my mom? I don't think she's even interacted with you. And they're like, she just looks mean. I'm like, okay. Whereas the ones who got to know me are like, no, we love hanging out with Miss Johnson. She like buys us all kinds of food and candy and lets us watch movies or whatever. But yeah, no. I scare people apparently. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. And I don't know, I've never been told I scare people, but I definitely have. I must get in thought too. And I don't know what facial expression I get when I'm in
Serious.
thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
serious. They just don't like to see somebody being serious, I guess. I don't know.
I guess, right? Yeah. But it's really interesting. Yeah. So, being told to smile, whatever, like just totally, I don't remember where I was going with that initially, but that's so interesting.
But how offensive is that to be told to smile by somebody when you were in a perfectly fine, you're like, okay, just doing my thing. You do you, I'll do me. Thank you.
And it goes back to Kate, like they needing something from you, right? It's
Yeah,
like, what was it bothering anybody? What if whatever I looked like, right? Why was there a need for someone I don't even know to, tell me to smile? And then what, as if that changes your day. I mean, some people say there is some science to that. If you smile, you feel better, but not, not if it's a fake smile.
Not if it's fake, right?
Well,
not if it makes you angry to do it. Yeah. That's
a total lack of containment boundaries too. So we've talked, I don't think I got into those in the book, but some of you have taken my class on boundaries or have done other boundary work with me. We talk about containment boundaries, which is when I recognize that it's inappropriate for me to project whatever I'm feeling or want to say or whatever on you in this situation. Like to me, when someone says, smile, right? Or you look whatever. I mean, that's just out of the blue. That's just no containment boundary, right? I don't have a relationship with them. There's no reason for them, to say that. I haven't made eye contact with them usually, even hardly, right? It's just kind of, we didn't even know that they were there. And then they say that. But yeah, so there's a balance of, I know where I was going though. Sorry, I'm jumping around, but back to what Kate, like, so some of us who have never really had an experience of setting boundaries or don't feel like it's comfortable or okay, a lot of times what we have to do, especially if we're empaths and we take in a lot of that, is we just back out completely, right? We kind of isolate ourselves because it's like, I can't handle these situations. So it's a big boundary just to say, I'm not going to put myself in that situation anymore. Right. I can say no. When I work with people who don't have boundaries, like that's a huge thing, is to be like, oh, I can actually say no to that invitation. I don't have to go there. It doesn't matter if I have anything else to do or not. I don't have to even lie or make up a reason. I can just say, thank you for the invitation, but no thanks, right? I don't need to explain myself. So there's that. And then sometimes we feel like, oh, now the answer is I'm just going to say no to everything that makes me uncomfortable. When we also haven't realized that part of why we're uncomfortable is that we're not experienced with the boundary dance, right? We're so afraid of not being able to set boundaries in the moment that we just want to put up a wall. That's not healthy either. So I was really fascinated, Kate, that you're sort of experimenting into that more of like, maybe I can navigate that situation.
Right.
Mary, I think you're doing it too a little bit, right? And choosing, so part of it is choosing which situations.
Yeah.
And then feeling like we're in control of what's happening, and we could still leave if we need to, but recognizing that it's not healthy to not engage at all either. But it's like learning a whole new language if we haven't done it. That's where Marcus was when he got here. No one had ever in his whole life asked him how he felt about things. He didn't live with other horses. In the human world, you just let people do whatever you want. And he liked people. It wasn't like he was mistreated or traumatized in that way. He just had no idea that he could say no thanks, or I don't prefer that, or I'd rather go over here. Like it just wasn't even, he didn't even know. I remember the very first time when I was brushing him, or like when he first came here, it was like you could just walk up to him and do anything you wanted to him, and he was like, he'd tell you where his scratchy spots were or whatever. But I remember the very first time, I don't remember what brush it was, something though, and I touched him with it or something, and he literally like picked up his leg and cocked it at me, right? Like almost like, and then he immediately put it down and was kind of like, what's going to happen now, right? Like maybe he had at one time and got punished for it, right? So he first was like surprised me by doing it, and then second, I could tell he kind of froze them, like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen now that I tried to say no. So we have to be able to have some positive experiences when we do finally say no or express ourselves. So being careful about when we choose to do that, so that maybe the other person's going to receive it in a positive way, right? Yeah. So Jen, what have your experiences with boundaries been? So I don't know if you're falling into the same category as, like, have you had trouble with boundaries in your life, or are you good at them?
Well, I think, I grew up in a family where I don't know that we had about the boundaries or not, but both of my parents worked a lot. And I had two brothers and no sisters. So I don't think I ever had to have my boundaries challenged. I always had my own room, didn't have to share a room, didn't have to share my stuff. And I don't know if you remember when we first came together or throughout college, like if you wanted to borrow something, I was like, oh, go for it. I didn't have a lot of ownership over my stuff because I'd never had to be challenged for it. And my friend Shelly, one time I got a new outfit and she was going on a date and I was like, ooh, why don't you wear this? And she's like, you haven't worn it yet. And I said, so, I mean, you're not going to mess it up. I mean, it's not like we're going on the same date with the same person or anything, but yeah. And then I think that when it really came into view was when I got married, and having lost my mother died when I was in college, and my family kind of distanced themselves because everybody was dealing with their own grief. And I went on and met someone and got married, and trying to figure out my place in their family. Like I'd had a good relationship with my mom and dad, but we'd gone through some stress since my mom died. And so then trying to, I didn't want to, do I take this person as my mother? Do I push her away? And my mother-in-law was not good with boundaries. She busted the boundaries. She had 2 daughters and 1 son. And so my husband and I were both the single gender individual. And so I don't think we were as aware of it until I started to try to deal with her and saw how she dealt with her daughters. And it was a mess. And so I actually, and I'm not proud of this, it's not, I ended up having a better relationship with her than she had with her daughters. She passed away in 2018, but I had my own struggles with her for some of the things. She just wanted to know everything and see everything about you. And I don't know, like I just wouldn't dream about invading her boundaries quite as much, but she just, kind of treated me like she would treat one of her daughters, and it didn't go well with her daughters. So it wasn't going to go well with me. And I did have to have a few conversations with her that were very uncomfortable, and she did not love it. She did not receive it well, but because I wasn't her daughter, I think that at least it went over a little better. And I think her older daughter was very confrontational in an aggressive way. And her younger daughter was a complete opposite. Like, she could not express herself about any displeasure, and just basically, I mean, it was bad on both sides. And but I think just because I would actually fumble my way through, like, look, I just can't have you walk into my house anytime, any day, because she lived on our property and lived with us for a few years. And I was like, I kind of need to have my own house. I kind of need to not have you like checking out my kitchen and my laundry room and everything, and then making comments on them. And I know it all sounds stupid, but it's just not being able to be just relaxed in my own home. Mm-hmm. And, or if there was anything, just, she was always telling gossip about the family. And so I knew she was telling gossip about me to the rest of the family, because then we'd hear from the family, oh, we heard that you blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, well, maybe we would have liked to have told you that instead of her telling you that, and just stuff that it doesn't sound like it's really important, but when you're going through it, you're just like, I just feel violated, and I just need to tell you. And, looking back now that she's gone, some of it does feel a little like, was I petty? But at the time, I was like, gosh, no, it was just like bubbling up in me. So I had to, and it makes me sad with regret that some of the times I had to kind of push away like that, because now she's gone, you know what I mean? So but I look back and I'm like, I just did what I could. I just did what I could.
But given what you said, though, also was that you thought you probably in some ways had a better relationship with her.
Oh, I know I did. Yeah.
So even though,
which is sad,
you regret that, maybe you had to have those tough conversations. They are important. Those uncomfortable conversations are actually really, really important. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and even now, like, you sound apologetic and saying, I hope it wasn't petty. Maybe it was petty. It sounds petty. And I'm like, man, if somebody was just walking into my house unannounced like that, there would be fisticuffs. Like, I wouldn't tolerate that. And I don't think that's anything that you need to feel apologetic about at all. Like, that's a violation.
I'm going to let Jerry Ann in too. She's just coming in. But this was a great example, because there's that thing about this. Not only are there the cultural expectations, right, Jen, you probably had in your mind about how you're supposed to be polite to an elder or mother-in-law or whatever, but you also then have a spouse who has a relationship with that person that is also going to be in the mix, right? So those are all really complicated dynamics, more so I think in the human world. When I look at Puck and Tempo, they have some codependent stuff, but they kind of, once the baby's grown up, they sort of shed a lot of the parent-child stuff, and it just becomes, relationship with you as an individual. But that's not the case often in the human world, really, for any of us, right? And then that's why it's so hard, I think, when later a lot of us enter that phase where then we're caretaking, or for the parents, and the roles change. That's so like paradigm shifting and like identity crisis kind of thing that happens, because we haven't really been relating as autonomous individuals in the relationship. Yeah. Hey, Jerry Ann.
Hi. I wonder if I missed the time. Did you guys just start or you've been
No,
going?
we started at 7. Yeah, an hour
Oh
ago.
my gosh. Oh, I'm so sorry. God
That's
dang
okay.
it.
No, I'm glad you're here.
Well, very late to the party. Sorry.
Okay.
I didn't
Anybody's
do
welcome
my
at any time.
I know I'm on Pacific time and for some reason I thought I was okay. Yeah. You're 2
I,
hours difference, not 3,
okay. Yeah.
right?
I'm so bad with time zones. So
Yeah, I thought I figured it out because okay, never mind. I won't waste time with you guys. I'm so sorry.
that's okay. So
Darn.
yeah. Well, we've been
Okay.
diving in. And I'd love to hear, like, since you just came in, like what was there something from the chapter in the book? Or I know you've also been doing the online class on boundaries.
Yeah. I think I've just been sort of absorbing and working on all of it. I was thinking that it's and it might have been from one of your things, the overlap of boundaries where you have a circle and one person's over here and one person's over here, but then there's this middle place where there it might have been some energy stuff I was looking at too, but it's understanding and respecting where that person is and where I am, and understanding there's some middle part of it, and
Mm.
just giving myself permission to actually put that boundary there, not let someone come in or yeah, you kind of caught me off guard. I was like thinking
No, that's
I
okay.
was going to
Actually,
listen for a little bit, but
with your two
I'll think
bubbles,
it's
that's really interesting because it goes with what we've been talking about. So we're each the individuals in our bubbles, right? And then the bubbles overlap. That's where that place of a beautiful negotiation of boundaries is. But what happens a lot of times is one person kind of disappears in that, right? Or doesn't express themselves.
right. And I think what it brings to me, and what I've been really working with, and maybe this is true for maybe a lot of people in my age group, but there was just so much politeness about taking care of other people and not necessarily understanding how to take care of yourself. And I mean really take care of yourself in terms of that emotion, those boundaries where people can't cross that, you know?
Yeah.
And I think you wrote something too in your book that struck me, that or in that chapter that struck me, about not feeling apologetic or not needing to apologize for making a clear boundary, and that the horses, when they make a boundary, they're like, they do that and then they're done. This is my space and now I'm done, and then there's just no more bringing it up. They don't have to keep going on and on about it. The action made it clear, and then there was just no more cerebral talking or beating themselves up for saying, oh, I needed that space. And that's where I think I found that really freeing.
Mm.
And with my horse, I just have my horse and my 2 goats, a mother and her son, and he's pretty big now. But it cracks me up to watch the negotiation of boundaries, especially when I'm taking them from one pasture into home, into the stalls. And who's going to fight for who's right next to me first, and who's going to get to go first. And today we had a stronger negotiation of who was going to get to the gate first, and it was my horse, which I've not seen her be that clear about, like, get out, I'm first with her, and then you guys can come after. And and I saw it for what it was, and I was like, yeah. And then she didn't hold it against him. They still squirmed through and got ahead of her, but she was with me and she didn't take it personally, and she didn't try and run after him or charge him or anything. She was just like, no, I told you, she gets to touch me first and then you guys get to go. And it cracked me up. It was funny, but I saw it for what it was.
You saw it for what it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that
So,
brings in a little bit, we talked a little bit about intention, but you know, with animals, so much of it is whoever has the strongest intention in that moment, right? Is going to have the biggest energy. And it's kind of like that feel of that intention, everyone else is kind of like, oh, okay, like that's really important.
Mhm.
That's really important to you right now, right?
Well, it's funny because the male goat, I mean, he's a Boer goat, so he's pretty good size, right? He's probably like 160 pounds, and he's a good size. He's bigger than a greyhound, you know, he's a big goat. And he's pretty pushy, and he dominates his mother, and he dominates attention getting. He's like a naughty teenager some of the time. You know, look at me. But she's just the mayor was just like, nope, not having it with you. And I just that instead of getting like, oh, be nice to each other, I'm like, yep, that was very appropriate, and let's just leave that alone.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
So what are the obstacles in the human world to on both sides to us really expressing ourselves honestly?
Ego.
You're not just
Fear. Yeah.
Ego and fear, right? Okay.
I do think that there is a disparity between males and females as to being able to ask for what you want or set a boundary or set a rule. I really do think that it is looked upon more negatively if a female tries to assert her, I want this, or no, I'm serious about this, or set a boundary, or no, I don't want that. And, you know, I do think that there's a disparity, at least where I live or in the world, the paradigm that I've had. So,
Yeah. Well, and that gets into a little bit of kind of that community responsibility with boundaries. So we say that to a large extent, horses let each other work it out, right? But I have also seen situations, lots of in animal situations, where one will kind of go to the other's defense or use another as a shield, or so aw,
sorry, he was being needy.
he was
So,
being
he's my needy dog that will tell me exactly what he wants, and the other one is just so chill. So sorry.
But like in those situations, so if all women are feeling like we're not supposed to voice it, then one does, and we get chastised, and everyone else goes, oh no, okay. But what if when one does, and a man or somebody comes and says something inappropriate, or you know, if other women would say, hey, she has a right to say that, right? Like, so there is some communal aspect of it, of like, you know, where do things start to feel out of balance? Let's say something about that, right? And we're not very good at that either in the human world. Like you could very much tell Jerry Ann, that was warranted how your mayor acted, right? Because the other ones are always pushy or whatever. So there's like this, like, oh no, that was rebalancing things. That was quite justified in the moment. That's the different than when someone is like constantly the bully all the time, right? It's almost like something needs to disrupt that energy.
Yeah.
There has to be consequences to that kind of energy. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, I'm sorry, I didn't get the name of the wonderful lady with her dog.
Jennifer.
Jennifer. Okay, so Jennifer was talking about how it seems culturally, you know, that it's not always accepted when a woman says things. And I know, I'm 62. My daughter's 34. She and I have been working on this whole boundary thing a lot. And she's a very clear and direct person. And I know for me that I have had the hardest time understanding her directness in stating or verbalizing her boundary about whatever, you know. And it feels very abrupt to me, or it feels rude, or almost rude, because she has permission to set her boundaries. She feels good about that. She feels fine about that. She's taking care of herself, and it's her mom who's like, whoa, what is this? Why do we have to do all this? But yet now that I'm understanding more about it, and I think your class was, your online thing has been helpful for me too. It's like, wow, man, I wish I'd had this kind of support or understanding directly for myself a long time ago, because I'm like, this is very freeing, not being apologetic about taking your space. You don't have to be rude or inconsiderate, but you can actually honor yourself enough to do it. And it takes practice, and it's the horses are very, right now, my mare is very helpful at showing me that, it's really neat.
Well, and that's something like part of me, I started out in the beginning saying like, wouldn't it be great if these kinds of things were taught in school, or like if these were topics that got introduced, if you even understood, that it's okay to express yourself and it's okay to not take it personally when somebody does do that, right?
Mhm.
But the really good news is we humans are really the only ones that are so confused about all of this.
Hmm.
If we have chickens, if we have horses, if we have even dogs, right? Cats, we actually can learn a little bit more about how to be healthier in relationship. We do have great teachers all around us. We don't think about that either. Because I kind of got stuck in like, well, how do people learn this if everything that we interact with is unhealthy? That's only if we're only focusing on the interactions with the human world,
Yeah.
right? Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't think it's all unhealthy. I know you didn't mean it that way, but I don't mean that my whole upbringing was unhealthy. I just mean this part, certainly culturally, and even just the permission to speak up and be direct is often not well received from a woman. It's just
No.
not.
We've
And
been
it
talking
doesn't
about that.
matter how nice you couch it. Even we learn how to kind of give it a soft sell or whatever. And it's just so, I think things are changing. I mean, I think things are moving in a different way, but
Well, I think it's beautiful that your daughter has a different pattern than you do. Like, what a beautiful parenting win that is, right?
well, I mean, one, to become, I mean, really, truly, if you're going to work on boundaries, you have to take responsibility for what wasn't working for both of us. What was entrenched or what was codependent or what really, truly wasn't good. And then working really hard to work that apart and work it out. So that's a journey, but truly that her age group, I feel, does a better job and feels most of the time more empowered about stating them what they want or how they want it. And I think I look at that and go, boy, they're just so pushy or so direct, when really they're just owning themselves in such a great way. And so it's really changing my perspective, you
That's
know
beautiful.
because I've had to get to it a different way than they did.
Yeah.
Than, selling
And
myself short probably a lot of time.
historically, it wasn't accepted and talked about. And I do think that, Kim and my generation, it began to be a conversation, but albeit a small one. I think it's getting to be more of a conversation. And I do think, gratefully, that, generations coming up, hopefully, of females do feel like this is a little bit more just par for the course. Yes, of course I can. And I don't have to make excuses. So I do think it's a generational thing. I think it's a regional thing. I think, hopefully it's something trending in a good direction where both sides can kind of, it's more about communication than people getting their feelings hurt either way. But it definitely wasn't a concept when I was in college. I don't know, when Kim and I were roommates, I don't think that anybody talked about that, even though we'd had women's lib and, equal rights kind of on the docket and stuff, I don't think that this conversation was one.
Yeah. I think, like, I don't know about y'all, like Kim, you had brought up, you know, communality and how important it is for us to support each other, you know, when we do speak up. And I think women have been just as bad at shaming each other about drawing boundaries, maybe even worse. I don't know.
Yes.
Have been, you know, and it's like, what role has Me Too played? Like, that was such a radical, you know, that was freaking radical, man. It's like all of a sudden everyone had permission to talk about this topic that so many of us have experienced and we've never felt empowered to talk about publicly, you know. And I mean, I think it was a lesson to a lot of us in older generations, because like we didn't feel like we could yell to the rooftops about it, you know. And younger women are just like, what the fuck, like this is not okay, this is not okay.
Right.
And you know, I think it's so powerful, you know, when we do, you know, it's like what Tempo did for Marcus, you know, like she came in and was like, all right, this isn't working, like the way that you're communicating, this is not working, dude. Like, let me teach him, let me show him, and I'm gonna do it so skillfully that you're gonna think I'm doing exactly what you've been doing, but I'm not. You know, it's like she was so, like, that was just so brilliant of her, and such a brilliant negotiation of that, you know, that tight space that they were all in. I don't know, like I really think that we as women especially have to support each other, you know, when we do speak up to whether it's to each other, whether it's in a professional situation. You know, like I was it's tangential, but it's like I was just talking to somebody, my yoga teacher today, about like watching, as a relatively new person to the whole horse thing. Like it's been like 3 years for me that I've been involved in this. And I mean, in just those 3 years, there's been this radical shift. And Kim, you've been a big part of it, of, you know, people finally speaking up and saying the way we're doing stuff with horses is not normal. It's not okay. Like it's not normative. We're being bullied into thinking like this is the only way to interact with horses, you know. And it's like I follow Lucky Phillips, you know, who talks a lot about how oppressed he felt and how bullied he felt, and you know how he didn't want to speak up. And now in the last year, all of a sudden he's become a thought leader because there's this paradigm shift happening. And it's because I think there's a critical mass of enough people saying, I don't want to do this. I don't want to act like this. I don't want to witness you acting like this either.
And you just said a really like, that's a mouthful right there, because what that says is like this fear we've had of speaking out about things. I mean, people know the truth when it's said and it's recognized. And I do feel like it's interesting to watch just in the last year, like how many more voices there are like emerging in the horse industry that are like speaking more of the same thing that, you know, before it was like nobody was saying it. It hasn't taken that long actually for it to kind of start to sink in, because it resonates, right? And I think that says a lot about us being bold enough to express our feelings and our needs, and also when we see someone else doing it, to back them up, or to, you know, even to just say thank you for doing that, or let it be heard and seen that that's happening. And that speaks a lot to not just hiding ourselves away, right? Even if we're out there not sure we're doing it well, but you never know when someone else sees you. And it doesn't have to just be the younger generation. Honestly, like they're saying, many of the younger generation are better at it. Sometimes it's we need to set examples for the older generation, right? Those of us who haven't had that experience, it feels really uncomfortable. Like Mary, for you, is it awesome when you see someone like standing up for themselves? Or do you ever, right? Don't you like, it's like, all right, I just saw her do that, right?
It's rare, but it feels good.
It feels good. Yeah. And especially in small Southern towns, it's really rare. Right?
Very rare in my little town.
Very,
You
very
will
rare.
know that.
Yeah. But so if and when you're out there doing it, you might be really setting an example that could be really powerful for someone else, right? Who is wishing that they could, but that can feel alone. Again, until you start gaining that momentum.
Yeah.
And people react to you when you do that, and like, oh my Lord, what's wrong with her? You know, what's going on? They are just kind of like standing there with their mouth open.
And you know what? That's okay.
Yeah.
It's like,
We
yeah. Tempo doesn't really care if she says something and it leaves one of the others standing with their mouth open for a minute, right? It's like, well, they'll pick up their jaw in a minute. Like that's what it was, right?
Catch up, y'all.
so Kim, that just makes me really think, like I'm trying to break down some of this, like what, why does it make us feel uncomfortable when somebody else speaks up or just sets their boundary or whatever. And I've been reading and thinking a lot about, when I look at a horse, am I really, one, giving them permission to express themselves, like really look at their range of expression and who they are and what they are. And I've been kind of practicing each day when I go out and greet my mare in the morning and I see her, I'm stepping back a little bit. One, I'm not getting in her bubble. I'm keeping my space and then watching her space and then watching her expression, watching her mood, and letting her have expression. And then it's almost like when we think about ourselves as women watching another woman or someone or a man, setting a boundary or saying what they need, are we really seeing their expression and valuing their expression just for the sake of what it is and not taking offense or thinking it has to be something different? Because with the horses, this paradigm shift really seems to include not manufacturing how they behave,
Yeah.
accepting their expression and then working with it naturally and guiding it or nurturing it to be safe and good and all those things, but not demanding it or forcing it to be other than what it is. Does that make sense?
It makes
That's
total
kind of-
sense. And there's two sides of that even. Well, one is a practice for me because trying to be someone who recovers from being someone who was taught to, manipulate horses or get horses, to do certain things or not accept certain things, is the practice of whatever the expression is, positive or negative, of saying thank you for letting me know how you feel. If I want art space, he grumps like that, I'm like, oh, thank you for letting me know I came a little closer than, like, that didn't feel good to you, right? So that thank you, regardless of what the response is. But then the other thing I had to remember is, like, I would start to, you can go to the opposite extreme where we disappear because we're so focused on just what the horse is doing, and that's either, like, we have the right also to be. So if I do that and I go into Bart's space and he grumps and I say thank you, but I can also sometimes say, but I have a right to be here too, I need to do this. And then it's a back and forth negotiation, right? We're not dismissing each other's feelings, we're just being like, okay, so this is what you need, this is what I need, can we? And then usually, like, it's fine once we both understand where the other is coming from,
right.
Yeah, but we have to make sure that we don't put so much value on how the horse is feeling that we forget that maybe we actually have an experience happening too.
Yep.
Right, for sure.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that, Kim. I totally agree. I think mine has been more of a mindset, and I think I guess it's going to happen too more as I interact with human beings too. It's just this mindset of, okay, this is where I am and this is where my space is, and I'm more self-aware of that. And then when I see whatever thing they're doing or expression or whatever, I'm like, I can take it in but still hold my space.
Yes.
Yeah.
I also find there's a really big difference in when it's just organic interactions versus a lot of the stuff we do with horses is not really an organic, like, we have an agenda or we need to do whatever, or we've decided to do whatever. And then, I don't know, it's like, it's very different than just organic interactions I have with mine. If they're loose on the farm and I'm doing some stuff and their stuff is very different than, I need to move them over here for
task oriented,
some purpose that matters to me that may not matter to them. Like, it's interesting how different those energies are.
I've been watching a fair amount of course, I cannot remember his name right now. The Australian guy. you know, the Australian guy. He's good.
Oh, Warwick Schiller,
No, the other one.
the other one. Anyway, I don't know.
Anyway, so he talks a lot about, you know, stillness. So there were a couple of things, like, you know, he talks a lot about stillness and not, he's like, you'll notice I'm not moving this horse. Like, I'm not moving his feet. I'm not thinking about moving his feet. I am communicating to him, this is my ground. It's like, that's his phrase. This is my ground. I believe in my ground, you know, and I think about that all the time now with the horses I'm around. I'm just like, I don't, you know, and Kim, you've given me some guidance on this with the whole, like, do I need to move this horse? Do I step out of the way? You know, and what am I communicating? And he's just like, you know, I don't need to move them, but I need them to understand that they can't necessarily move me either. Like, this is my ground and I'm creating a safe place for them around me. But that doesn't mean that they get to push or walk on me. You know, and the other thing that he mentioned, and I really hadn't thought about it this way, he's like, when you think about horses negotiating space amongst themselves, you know, and how they do it, it's like they might be doing that, I don't know, like as a percentage of the day. It's a very, very tiny percentage of the day that they might be pushing each other out of the way or doing any kind of, you know, that type of space negotiation. And when you think about how we work with horses, we're constantly pushing them here, pushing them there, moving them here, moving them there. It's almost all that we do, you know. And he's like, it's no wonder that they don't want to come, they don't voluntarily come to us. We have to go, like, you know, grab, like, find them in the paddock and make them come to us, because all we do is push them away. And I was like, damn, you know, I mean, when you think about it, like, whatever, they do that like 1% of the time, maybe we're doing it like 95% of the time that we're working with them sometimes. Yeah.
And it reminds me of how unhealthy work relationships are, and those sorts of hierarchies, right? Where it's always top down. But another thing that you said, Kate, that's kind of interesting in terms of boundaries is it is important for us to know what our space is, right? And to have it not be invaded, but there's also the why. So there are actually, I've been playing with this, like, if I have that initial reaction that my horse is coming and I'm like, oh, don't invade my space. And I'm kind of like, why do I need to stand here? The horse is maybe trying to go there. Maybe I just need to back up and give them space. Like, I watch the horses, they often move out of each other's way, not because one's pushing another, but just to say, I don't really want you that close to me either, right? I'm going to move me. So it's this play of like, if it needs to be my space, I need to be able to know how to own that space.
Yeah.
But I also might need to be willing to say, why am I holding that space? Is it just a power thing? Is there a real reason why I
yeah.
space?
And I should say contextually, like, this is always a situation where it's like he's working with a horse that's got behavioral quote unquote issues. And he's demonstrating, like, I've got you, like, I am holding this space. You don't have to be on guard all the time. I'm on guard. I've got you. So like, that's, and yeah, so like that should be clear too, because I really heard, like, yeah, you know, you talked to me about that when I was struggling with Chinook and, like, you know, negotiating space with him. And this was a very, very pushy horse that I worked with at a rescue that I'm no longer working at. And like, it was just a constant, I don't know, it's just a constant learning for both of us, I think, like how to negotiate being with each other, because neither one of us, it's like he didn't know how to do it and I didn't know how to do it with him either. We were just learning from each other. So like, I really heard you, you know, when you said, like, you know, I'm experimenting with being more flexible about this. And it goes right back to that flexible boundaries thing that you talked about in the beginning. Like, what are the rules for? Like, what is the rule for?
Right. I think that's always a really valuable question. And
is it just because I said so? Because like, nobody likes that.
Nobody likes that, right? And the other thing you said, and I know we're getting on an hour and a half, so we'll probably need to start wrapping up here soon. But the other thing you said that was really cool was with you and the horse, like, we're both figuring it out, right? like, that's the thing too, we need to remember in the human world is like, most of the people we're interacting with are probably not great with boundaries either, one way or the other, right? And so that is something to give ourselves and others a lot of grace with, of just being like, okay, I'm trying my best here with this like deficit that I'm working with, and you're over there trying with your deficit. And so I love what you said in the beginning, Kate, where you said sometimes I I don't do it very gracefully, right? Or maybe I say it rudely, but then I go back later and say, once I've kind of had a chance to think about it, maybe, I kind of overreacted, or I didn't say that very nicely and I apologize. Like, let's own that part. But yet still saying the boundary is the boundary, and that kind of thing. So I mean, one thing I just say is kudos to everybody who's actively working on this, because it is challenging work. But I'm really grateful that we have animals and horses, and I'm watching Jen with her dog there, right? And it's like, you two are negotiating boundaries right now, right? Like, that's the other thing to remember, is a relationship doesn't have to look any certain way. Even when sometimes you look at some of my old relationships I've been in before, where the boundaries were unhealthy, but at the time we were both agreeing to them, so that was okay, right? But we have to know in ourselves, we shouldn't agree to something that doesn't feel okay to us. That's the key, is not there should be no rules of how a relationship looks, as long as both individuals, are all the participants in the relationship, feel good about it. It's okay. The problem is when one or more doesn't feel good and doesn't feel like they're being honored, or right. And we have to tell people when we're feeling that way, because other people are not mind readers.
No, they're not mind readers. Can I tell you the two things I knew? There was things in your book that I had in the chapter that I really liked. I just
Yes.
wanted to say the one was number 3, never feel guilty for clarifying the space you need.
Mm.
And number 4, don't judge yourself or others for personal space needs. And that's those two really resonated with me. Um, and those are, my own set of baggage, feeling guilty about, saying what space I need, or my own judgments when someone else is saying what space they need, because I'm saying, well, I don't know why you need all that space. I never got any of that space, and then I realized, oh, you didn't get that space, but that wasn't actually very healthy that you didn't get that space, and you should have had that space. So now you can take that judgment away from judging this other person for saying what they need, because now it shows you you assumed, well, of course they shouldn't be that way because you didn't get that, and it was like, wow, that was like mind-blowing, Kim. Reading that like a week, I'm like, oh my gosh. So anyways, I know you're trying to wrap up, but I
Yeah.
did want it. I looked back at the things that I had read and went back over, and I was like, yep, wow.
That's
Wow.
beautiful. Yeah.
So thank you.
Anything
Thank you,
that's in there that was
Rhonda.
bullets for me means that it was profound for me in my life too. So
Yeah. Well, geez, god dang, girl. Yeah.
a lot of us are very similar.
Mhm.
Well, Mary, do you have
But
anything you
all
want to
good
say
stuff.
at the end, Mary, or anything else that you wanted to bring forth that you didn't?
Um, I'm just so thankful that I've found boundaries, and that I have been able to work through some things and feeling better about it, and that I do deserve to have them.
Yes,
was
you do.
huge.
And probably something that you'll have to always continue reminding yourself forever, right? Like every time.
Yes.
That goes back to when some of them have become like core beliefs that are just our automatic response is always going to be to feel a little guilty or to feel a little out of line, but then just letting our thinking brain go back and say, no, actually, it's okay. It's okay. It's all right
Yeah.
to ask for that. It's okay to have boundaries. Yeah. Yep. Cool. This was a good discussion. I feel like boundaries are one that like we could meet once a week for like a month or 2 months, or 3 months, and still never, have everything that there is to uncover with it. But it'll come up again probably in some of the next ones. I have to actually look and see what lesson 11 is going to be. Communication is not optional. That kind of that's going to be fun after boundaries too, because it kind of gets into the conversation we were talking about, the family who said they want to just take each other at their word. And then sometimes you notice the body language. So it's this idea that we are always communicating something, whether we know it or not. It's impossible not to communicate something to others if we're just even there, right? We have energy, we have an expression, Jen, right? Whatever the expression is, how people interpret what we're communicating is another question. But yeah, so that will be a fun one next month. But thank y'all so much for being here. And Jerry Ann, I'm so sorry about the confusion on this
Oh
phone.
no, it's my fault. I could have totally, I was wasting time from 4 o'clock on waiting for 5 o'clock, and it's my own. So I guess we're just 2 hours difference,
Okay.
right? If you're 7, if
So it's
you're
8:30 here right now, 8:36 right now.
6:30, 7:30. No, it is 3 hours.
Hmm.
Because it's 5:30 where I am, and you said it's 8:30.
It's 8:30 here, yeah.
So if you started at 7, I needed to be there at 4,
Yes.
5, 6, 7. Yeah, duh, I can't do my math today. Wow, I'm so bad. Okay.
So next time it's 4 for you.
It's 4 for Jerry Ann, that's for sure. Boy. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank
Well,
you.
but you'll be able to listen back and hear the first hour on the recording that I'll post.
That's true. I can go back and do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Will do. So
Awesome.
can I ask one question? Is the recording only available to your Patreon people then? It's not
Yes.
public, right?
It's not
It's
public,
just
right?
it's just to your own group. Okay.
It's just to this group. Yeah. That's been.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of reassuring. Sometimes we talk about things that are pretty,
Yeah.
you know.
We definitely keep this in that group, and there's only like 30 members, and not even all of them are active or watch it back. But yeah, it's meant to be that just a smaller group that
Okay.
has these. Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. See y'all.
Thank you. Thank you, Kim.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.